The laughter started before I even finished asking for the 10% raise. Troy Bennett's voice cut through our production floor like a buzzsaw, that MBA-trained chuckle echoing off concrete walls where 47 workers suddenly found their stamping presses and conveyor belts extremely interesting. "You're a factory dinosaur, Clay." "I'm Clay Donovan, by the way, 51 years old, senior manufacturing engineer at Heartland Manufacturing for the past 24 years. The guy standing there holding a folder full of documentation about why I deserve that raise after 3 years of wage freezes. Watching our 33-year-old Wharton MBA CEO dismiss me like I was some piece of rusted equipment scheduled for replacement. "At your age, Clay," Troy continued, adjusting those designer glasses while the production line hummed behind him, "we need forward-thinking automation experts, not legacy engineers stuck in old-school manufacturing mindsets." He couldn't even finish without that smug smile spreading across his face. The same one he wore in quarterly meetings where he talked about maximizing human capital efficiency and streamlining operational overhead. The folder in my hands contained 24 years of innovations. Every automation upgrade I'd designed, every production efficiency improvement I'd implemented, every late night I'd spent in this plant while Troy was probably networking at wine bars, learning about disruptive manufacturing paradigms from other MBAs who'd never touched a wrench. My wife Grace calls me stubborn. My 19-year-old son Rex thinks I'm old-fashioned because I still believe in showing up early and staying late. But what Troy didn't understand was that my so-called outdated approach had kept Heartland's production efficiency at 94% for over a decade, while our competitors struggled to hit 85%. "The predictive maintenance system I designed saved us $1.8 million last year alone," I said, keeping my voice steady even though I wanted to grab Troy by his $200 tie and show him what real manufacturing experience looked like. "The quality control automation that prevented those defects on the Patterson Industries contract. The conveyor optimization that increased our throughput by 23%. Troy waved his hand like he was swatting away a fly, that gesture he'd probably learned in some leadership seminar about dismissing subordinates. "Everyone's replaceable, Clay, even senior engineers with decades of experience. The board sees a senior engineer pulling $89,000 when we can hire 2 fresh mechanical engineering graduates for that same cost. They've got energy, they understand modern frameworks, they don't need hand-holding." He paused, letting that practiced executive smile never reach his eyes. "If you think you're worth more than what we're paying, maybe it's time to explore opportunities elsewhere. Manufacturing is evolving beyond traditional approaches. Maybe it's time to think about early retirement. Golf courses are nice this time of year." Something cracked inside me. Right then, not anger exactly, but something deeper and more fundamental. The realization that 24 years of loyalty meant nothing to someone who saw quarterly profit margins instead of people. That the company I'd helped grow from a 200-employee operation into an 800-worker manufacturing powerhouse would throw me away the moment some MBA decided my experience was too expensive. Golf courses. As if I could afford early retirement with Grace's medical bills and Rex's trade school tuition eating up our savings. I walked back through the plant floor to my workstation, past machines I'd automated, systems I'd optimized, processes I'd refined over 2 decades. Not even an office after 24 years and a senior engineer title. I still worked at a desk wedged between the quality control station and the parts inventory because open workspace promotes collaboration and efficiency, according to Troy's latest consultant report. The afternoon shift was just starting. Miguel Santos operating the stamping press I'd automated in 2019. Janet Williams running quality checks on equipment I'd calibrated myself. These weren't just co-workers. They were people whose jobs depended on keeping this place running efficiently, people who'd trained under me, learned from me, counted on the systems I'd built. On my desk sat a photo from last Christmas. Grace looking tired but smiling after her back surgery that cost us $23,000 out of pocket even with our insurance. Rex home for winter break from community college where he was studying welding because he wanted to work with his hands like his old man. Following a tradition Troy probably thought was obsolete. Our medical premiums were eating up 28% of my take-home pay. Grace's physical therapy was another $400 a month. Rex's trade school tuition had just increased 15% for the 3rd year running. And here I was getting called a dinosaur for asking for a 10% raise after 24 years of keeping this place profitable while Troy's salary had increased 35% in just 2 years as CEO. Meanwhile, according to the company newsletter, Troy had just bought a second vacation home in Colorado. a ski cabin to go with his primary residence in the expensive part of town. The same newsletter that featured a photo of him accepting an innovation award for the automation framework I'd designed, with my name nowhere in the article. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a worn leather notebook I'd kept for years. The cover was cracked from handling, filled with ideas I'd developed in my garage workshop on weekends, automation concepts I'd refined using my own equipment and time. This wasn't company property. These were my innovations, documented meticulously with dates, sketches, and implementation notes spanning 15 years of weekend tinkering. The notebook contained 14 different automation patents I'd filed over the past 15 years, conveyor optimization algorithms I'd written on my home computer, quality control systems I'd prototyped in my garage using sensors and monitoring equipment I'd bought myself, predictive maintenance protocols I'd developed because I loved solving complex manufacturing problems, even in my spare time. What Troy never bothered to investigate was that I'd never assigned these patents to Heartland Manufacturing. The employment contract I'd signed 24 years ago covered work done during company time using company resources. But my garage workshop innovations existed in a legal gray area, personal projects developed on my time with my equipment, funded by my own money. I'd shared these innovations with Heartland out of loyalty, never thinking to protect my interests, never imagining the company would one day call me obsolete while profiting from systems I'd invented during weekends and vacation days. The irony was bitter. Troy saw me as expensive legacy baggage, but every major efficiency gain that kept us competitive had started in my personal workshop. My computer pinged with an email about next week's union meeting. Lance Hamilton, our local president, had been talking about age discrimination lately. How companies were pushing out experienced workers to hire cheaper labor, then wondering why their institutional knowledge walked out the door. At 58, Lance had seen it happen too many times. I thought about my father, who'd worked 32 years at the Ford plant before they moved production overseas. Company loyalty matters, he'd always said. Take care of them, they'll take care of you. He believed that right up until the day they handed him early retirement papers and cut his pension benefits in half. He never recovered financially, spent his last years working part-time at Home Depot just to pay for my mother's medications. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn message I'd ignored for months. Wade Phillips, CEO of Apex Industrial Solutions, Heartland's biggest competitor. We'd connected after a manufacturing expo where I'd presented on automation efficiency, back when Heartland actually let me represent the company at industry events. Clay, I've been following Heartland's production innovations, and I recognize real engineering talent when I see it. The offer stands whenever you're ready for a serious conversation. We value gray hair here. It means wisdom, not obsolescence. I'd dismissed it before. I was loyal to Heartland. I believed in what we were building. I thought Troy, despite his youth and corporate speak, understood my value to the organization. I thought my track record spoke for itself. How naive that seemed now. My fingers hovered over Wade's contact number. 24 years of corporate conditioning screamed at me to be reasonable, to not burn bridges. What if this was just a bad day? What if Troy reconsidered? What if I could find a way to work within the system instead of abandoning it? Then I remembered his words. Factory Dinosaur. The dismissive wave of his hand. The suggestion that I should retire early and play golf while my family struggled with medical bills and education costs. The complete lack of respect for everything I'd built here. My family deserved better than a father who accepted being undervalued. They deserved someone who fought for what he was worth, who refused to be discarded like outdated equipment. I called Wade Phillips. Wade Phillips speaking. The voice was warm, professional, with none of the artificial corporate enthusiasm I'd grown tired of at Heartland. Real confidence, not the manufactured kind that came from MBA programs. This is Clay Donovan from Heartland Manufacturing. I think it's time we had that conversation you mentioned. There was a pause, then genuine excitement in his voice. Clay, I was beginning to think you'd never call. I've been following your automation work for years. Are you finally ready to explore opportunities where experience is actually valued instead of seen as a liability? I looked around the plant floor. At workers half my age operating systems I'd designed. At the management offices where people younger than my son made decisions about processes they'd never run themselves. At Troy's corner office, where he was probably already planning how to replace his expensive legacy employee with hungry young talent. I'm ready, I said. When can we meet? How about dinner tomorrow? I know a steakhouse in Cleveland where we can talk without interruption. Say 7 p.m.? Grace had her book club tomorrow night. Rex would be at trade school for his evening welding certification classes. Perfect timing to start planning my future without Heartland's involvement. I'll be there. That evening at dinner, Grace noticed my distracted mood. We were having leftovers at the kitchen table, the same routine we'd followed for 20 years. Rex was telling us about his welding instructor, an old-timer who'd worked on skyscrapers in Detroit back in the day. "You're quiet tonight," Grace said, studying my face with those eyes that had seen through my poker face for 23 years of marriage. "Rough day at work?" I set down my fork and looked at the two people who mattered most in the world to me. My wife, who'd supported my career through countless late nights and weekend projects, who'd never complained when I missed family events to fix production problems. My son, who looked up to me despite thinking some of my methods were old-fashioned, who was proud to follow in my footsteps working with his hands. "Troy turned down my raise request today," I said quietly. "Called me a factory dinosaur in front of half the production crew." Grace's fork clinked against her plate. Rex stopped mid-sentence about arc welding techniques. He said, "What?" Rex's voice had that edge it got when someone disrespected his family. "He thinks I'm too old, too expensive, too set in my ways. Suggested I consider early retirement and take up golf." Grace reached across the table and took my hand. "Clay, you've given that company 24 years of your life. You've saved them millions of dollars. You've trained half their workforce. Apparently that doesn't matter anymore. They want young engineers who'll work for half my salary and won't question corporate decisions." Rex leaned forward, his welding calloused hands clasped in front of him. "Dad, you taught me that if someone doesn't value your work, you find someone who will. Isn't that what you told me when I was thinking about quitting welding school last semester? Smart kid. Using my own advice against me." "There's something else," I said. "I've got a meeting tomorrow night with Wade Phillips from Apex Industrial. They've been trying to recruit me for months." Grace squeezed my hand tighter. "And I'm thinking it might be time to see what they're offering. Troy made it clear I'm not wanted at Heartland. Maybe it's time to stop trying to prove myself to people who will never appreciate what I bring to the table." The next evening, I sat across from Wade Phillips at Morton's Steakhouse in Cleveland, a place that required reservations weeks in advance. He'd made one phone call and gotten us a corner booth with privacy. That told me everything I needed to know about Apex Industrial's influence in Ohio manufacturing circles. Wade was in his late 50s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a casual polo shirt instead of a corporate uniform. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, the grip of someone who'd actually worked with his hands before learning to read balance sheets. When he smiled, it reached his eyes. "I've been following your work for years, Clay," Wade said over his whiskey. "The automation upgrades at Heartland don't happen by accident. That predictive maintenance system for the automotive contracts, my engineers spent 4 months trying to reverse engineer your approach and couldn't crack the core algorithm." I felt a mix of pride and frustration. Someone had actually noticed the technical complexity of what I'd built. Someone understood that innovation didn't just happen by accident. "How did you know that was mine?" I asked. Wade smiled and took a sip of his drink. "Because Troy Bennett couldn't program a microwave, let alone architect industrial automation systems. I've heard him speak at conferences, great at buzzwords, terrible at substance. Real innovation requires deep expertise, and that has to come from someone who understands both the theory and the practical applications." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Plus, I have contacts throughout the industry. Engineers talk to each other. Your reputation among people who actually understand manufacturing is solid gold, even if your current management doesn't seem to appreciate it. Half the automation specialists in Ohio know your work, even if they've never met you personally. What exactly are you offering?" "Senior Automation Director position, oversight of our entire production efficiency division. Base salary $185,000, equity package that vests over 4 years, and a team of 6 engineers. Average age on my team is 48. We believe experience creates better solutions than enthusiasm alone." My breath caught. $185,000 was more than double my current salary, enough to handle Grace's medical expenses without touching our retirement savings, enough to help Rex finish trade school without him working nights at the hardware store, enough to finally stop choosing between financial security and family needs. "But more importantly," Wade continued, "recognition, your name on patents, your picture in trade publications, credit for the innovations you create. We're not interested in managers taking credit for engineering work. When you solve a problem, you get the professional recognition that goes with it." He paused, studying my expression. "And if you brought personal innovations with you, theoretical systems you developed on your own time using your own resources, we have a proper intellectual property acquisition process, fair market compensation for proven technology, unlike companies that just assume they own everything their employees think about." Something flickered in Wade's eyes. Understanding. He'd done his homework, knew about the legal gray areas that bigger companies often ignored or deliberately overlooked. I pulled out my leather notebook and placed it on the table between us. "I have documentation and patent filings proving these systems were personal projects. Heartland implemented them, but they never formally acquired the rights. Their legal department never bothered to investigate ownership." Wade's eyes widened as he flipped through pages of automation designs, each entry dated and documented with development notes. Years of weekend work, personal passion projects that had become the foundation of Heartland's competitive advantage. "This is comprehensive work, Clay. How much of Heartland's efficiency advantage is based on your personal innovations?" "About 65%, I said quietly. "The core automation protocols, the predictive maintenance, algorithms, the quality control systems, all developed in my garage workshop before the company implemented them. I shared them out of loyalty, never thinking they'd one day tell me I was obsolete." Wade closed the notebook and met my eyes. "That's quite an oversight on their legal team's part." "Troy doesn't value senior functions," I said, echoing the CEO's dismissive attitude toward experienced employees, including thorough legal review. "He's too focused on cutting costs and hiring cheap labor to worry about protecting existing intellectual assets." We spent the next 2 hours discussing technical details, team structures, and project timelines. Wade understood industrial automation in a way Troy never had and never would. He asked intelligent questions about scalability, maintenance trade-offs, and real-world implementation challenges. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to someone who respected both my experience and my potential contributions. By the time dessert arrived, we'd outlined a transition plan that would bring my personal innovations to apex while staying within legal boundaries. Everything documented, everything transparent, everything Heartland should have done years ago if they'd valued long-term relationships over short-term cost savings. "When could you start?" Wade asked. "I'd need to give proper notice. 2 weeks minimum, maybe 3 to ensure a smooth transition. I won't leave them hanging, even after today." Wade nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of professionalism I'm looking for. Integrity matters, especially when you've been treated poorly. We can wait for the right person to do things the right way." 2 weeks later, I placed my resignation letter on Troy's desk. Printed on company letterhead, submitted through official HR channels, following every protocol he claimed to value. Professional to the end, even as I prepared to take my expertise to his biggest competitor. Troy barely looked up from his MacBook, his attention split between emails and what looked like a cost reduction spreadsheet, the multitasking that passed for leadership in his generation. 2 weeks' notice, he said, scanning the letter quickly. "Where are you going?" I'd considered crafting some story about consulting or early retirement, but truth had more impact. I was done protecting his feelings. "Apex Industrial Solutions." That got his attention. His head snapped up from the screen, eyes narrowing with the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him since the morning's humiliation. "Our biggest competitor. That's unfortunate timing. We're in final preparations to bid on the Morrison Automotive contract next month." "I know," I said simply. "I designed the automation proposal that's supposed to win us that bid." For the first time, I saw Troy calculating what my departure might actually cost the company. The spreadsheet mentality finally grasping that some assets couldn't be easily quantified or replaced. "We should discuss retention options immediately," he said, closing his laptop and giving me his full attention for what might have been the first time in months. "Perhaps that raise you mentioned, maybe 15% plus a promotion to assistant VP level with your own office." The offer was everything I'd wanted 2 weeks ago, more than I dared to ask for. If he'd shown this flexibility before calling me a dinosaur, none of this would have happened. But some doors, once closed, can't be reopened with money alone. Apex offered $185,000 plus equity, I said. But more importantly, they value experience over age discrimination. They see gray hair as wisdom, not a liability to be managed out. Troy laughed, but it sounded hollow now, nothing like the confident dismissal from his office. They're overpaying by at least 60%. You'll be disappointed when they realize a 51-year-old engineer can't adapt to their development pace and modern automation demands. I smiled back, feeling that strange new confidence that came from finally knowing my worth. We'll see who's disappointed, Troy. My last 2 weeks at Heartland were surreal. Suddenly, managers who'd barely acknowledged me for years wanted to take me to lunch, pick my brain about systems they'd never bothered to understand. Troy scrambled to document processes he'd never learned, realizing too late that institutional knowledge was walking out the door with the people who'd created it. I completed every transition document with professional thoroughness, trained my replacement, a 28-year-old named Brad who seemed both eager and overwhelmed by the scope of what I'd been managing single-handedly. I also made careful copies of every email where I'd shared innovations with Heartland over the years, creating a clear evidence trail of their failure to properly acquire intellectual property they'd freely implemented. The morning I walked out of Heartland's main entrance for the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not excitement exactly, but purpose. The sense that I was finally taking control of my career instead of letting others define my worth. 6 weeks later, I was sitting in my new corner office at Apex Industrial, explaining to my team of 6 engineers how we were going to revolutionize automation efficiency. Real engineers with real experience. The youngest was 35. The oldest was 54. People who understood that wisdom and energy weren't mutually exclusive, that gray hair meant proven problem-solving skills, not obsolete thinking. Wade hadn't lied about the culture. During my first team meeting, when I mentioned my 24 years of manufacturing experience, heads nodded with respect instead of eyes rolling with impatience. These weren't kids fresh from college who thought they could reinvent manufacturing overnight. These were professionals who valued learning from someone who'd actually solved the problems they were facing. The first implementation of my automation framework went live at Apex 3 months after I arrived. The same algorithms Troy had dismissed as outdated legacy thinking were now processing production data 35% faster than industry standards. Quality control accuracy increased 42%. Equipment downtime decreased 48%. The predictive maintenance protocols I'd perfected in my garage workshop were now preventing equipment failures 68 hours before they occurred, giving maintenance teams time to plan repairs instead of scrambling to fix emergency breakdowns. Our clients were seeing cost savings that exceeded their most optimistic projections. Word spread quickly through Ohio's manufacturing network. Within 4 months, Apex had landed 3 major contracts from companies looking to upgrade their automation systems. My name was on every patent filing, my picture appeared in Manufacturing Today magazine, and for the first time in my career, I was getting proper credit for innovations I'd created. The morning Morrison Automotive announced they were canceling their contract negotiations with Heartland and awarding the project to Apex instead, my phone started ringing. First call was from Industrial Automation Weekly, wanting to interview the engineer behind Apex's efficiency breakthrough. Second call was from a consulting firm interested in licensing our predictive maintenance technology for their clients. Third call was from Troy Bennett. I let it go to voicemail. He called 6 more times over the next 2 days before leaving a message that I saved for posterity. Clay, this is Troy. We need to discuss consulting opportunities immediately. Heartland is prepared to offer substantial compensation for your expertise. Please call me back as soon as possible. We made a mistake. The admission felt hollow, too little too late, motivated by desperation rather than genuine recognition. I didn't return the call. A week later, Troy was waiting beside my car in Apex's parking lot after work. He looked different, tired, stressed, none of the polished confidence from that day. He'd called me a factory dinosaur. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and we both knew it. "This is inappropriate, Troy," I said, maintaining distance while fishing for my car keys. "You've put 200 families at risk," he said, his voice urgent and desperate. "Heartland is facing serious operational problems because of the intellectual property you took with you." "I didn't take anything that belonged to Heartland," I replied calmly. I took my personal intellectual property that Heartland used without proper acquisition. Your legal team should have done their due diligence 15 years ago when I started sharing innovations with the company." Troy stepped closer, desperation evident in his bloodshot eyes. He'd probably been working 18-hour days trying to contain the damage, discovering too late what happens when you lose the person who actually understood your core systems. "Name your price," he said. "Whatever Apex is paying, we'll double it, triple it. We'll make you VP of engineering, give you equity, your own R&D budget, whatever you want." I thought about those 24 years sitting at that workstation while he collected executive bonuses for innovations I'd created in my spare time, about the morning he'd dismissed me like obsolete equipment in front of half the production crew. "You once told me everyone's replaceable," I said quietly, "even senior engineers with decades of experience. I'm just following your business philosophy." 6 months later, Heartland's production efficiency had dropped 52%. They'd lost Morrison Automotive, Patterson Industries, and 2 other major clients. The company laid off 160 workers in 2 waves, ironically targeting senior staff with the highest salaries first. The same cost-cutting mentality that had driven me away. The tech media described it as a catastrophic loss of institutional knowledge and systematic deterioration of their automation capabilities. Industry analysts wrote case studies about the dangers of undervaluing experienced talent in competitive markets, using Heartland as a cautionary tale. Troy resigned under pressure from the board after their stock hit a 3-year low. His replacement was a 56-year-old former General Motors executive who immediately began trying to poach senior engineers from competitors, but the damage to Heartland's reputation in the engineering community was irreversible. Then came the inevitable lawsuit. Heartland sued me for theft of intellectual property, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty. Their case collapsed spectacularly when my documentation proved conclusively that I'd developed the core systems as personal projects using my own time and equipment. The judge not only dismissed their claims but awarded me legal fees, noting that Heartland had failed to secure proper ownership of innovations they'd implemented, demonstrating a pattern of inadequate due diligence regarding intellectual property rights. But victory felt more complex than I'd expected. Janet Williams, Heartland's former quality control supervisor, visited my office 3 months after the lawsuit ended. She'd been with the company 16 years before the layoffs, someone I'd trained personally, worked alongside through countless production challenges. 160 people lost their jobs, Clay, she said, sitting across from my desk. People with families, mortgages, kids in college. I know Troy treated you badly, but was your revenge worth destroying their livelihoods? The question hit harder than any lawsuit. I'd focused so intently on Troy's arrogance and age discrimination that I'd underestimated the collateral damage to good people who'd never wronged me. "You're right to be concerned about them," I said. "That's why Apex has hired 68 former Heartland employees in the last 6 months, including everyone from your quality control team who wanted to join us." Janet's expression softened slightly. "And the others? The ones who can't relocate, who are too specialized, who are close to retirement age themselves." That conversation led to the Experienced Engineers Initiative at Apex. We hired 68 former Heartland employees and partnered with trade schools to retrain displaced workers over 45. The program became a model throughout the Midwest. 8 months later, I received the Ohio Manufacturing Excellence Award. Standing at that podium, I thought about Troy's Dinosaur comment. He'd been wrong about everything. We weren't expensive legacy baggage, we were experienced professionals who understood the difference between moving fast and building systems that actually work. Last month, Heartland declared bankruptcy. The company I'd helped build for 24 years was gone, dismantled by leadership that confused cost-cutting with innovation. If you're reading this and you're over 45, remember, your knowledge is worth fighting for. Document your work. Know your rights. Never let anyone convince your best years are behind you. Age isn't a weakness. In manufacturing, it's wisdom waiting to be unleashed. When experience finally gets angry enough to demand respect, entire industries change. Your loyalty means nothing if you don't value yourself first. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to become invisible.